the silver silence of a winter eclipse, the moon wept frozen tears upon the throne of ice. Ilara's breath fogged the air like a ghost fleeing her lips, each exhale a fragile rebellion against the cold that clawed at her bones. The great hall of the Alpha King's court loomed around her, its walls hewn from ancient glaciers that gleamed with an unforgiving pallor. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, their flames dancing like captive spirits, casting long shadows that twisted across the flagstones, slick with meltwater. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine resin and damp fir, mingled with the metallic tang of fear, hers, and the barely concealed dread of those who watched. She stood at the center of it all, wrists bound in chains of blackened silver that bit into her skin, drawing thin rivulets of blood that traced crimson paths down her arms. The silver chain around her neck, bearing a pendant shaped like a crescent moon etched with faint runes, felt heavier than the verdict it mocked. It had been her mother's, a relic from the old temples where Omegas once whispered to the goddess under starlit skies. Now, it pressed against her collarbone like a curse, its cool weight a reminder of the life she had never truly claimed. The court assembled in a semicircle of judgment, warriors in armor forged from moon-forged steel, their eyes hard as the frost outside, elders draped in cloaks of wolf pelt, faces etched with the scars of battles long won, and at the heart of it, the Alpha King himself, Thorn, enthroned upon a seat carved from the heartwood of ancient yews. His presence dominated the hall, a storm contained in flesh, broad shoulders clad in a mantle of deep crimson edged with silver thread, his dark hair falling in waves that framed a face both regal and haunted. His eyes, the color of storm clouds over snow, met hers for the briefest moment, and in that gaze, Ilara saw not cruelty, but a chasm of unspoken regret. He was the architect of her ruin, yet the weight of his crown seemed to bow him, as if the very air grew heavier in his orbit. Omega Ilara, of the Frostvale pack, intoned the High Elder, his voice a gravelly rumble that echoed off the ice walls. He was a bent figure, his fur-lined robes whispering as he unrolled a parchment sealed with the king's mark, a howling wolf beneath a full moon. You stand accused of treason against the realm. Your whispers in the shadows sow doubt among the loyal, your hidden bloodline a threat to the purity of our line. The sentence is death by exile into the white wastes, where the winds claim all who wander without mercy. Murmurs rippled through the assembly like wind through barren pines, some shocked, others approving, their howls of agreement subdued but feral. Ilara's heart pounded, a wild drumbeat against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let the tremor in her legs betray her. Treason? The word tasted like ash on her tongue. She had done nothing but question the endless wars, the sacrifices demanded of the weak to fuel the strong. Her whispers were pleas for peace, born from visions that came to her in dreams. Flashes of blood-soaked snow and a king falling to his knees under a fractured sky. But to speak of such things was to invite the blade. Thorn's hand tightened on the arm of his throne, knuckles whitening beneath the leather gloves. He had rejected her seasons ago, during the mating rites under the harvest moon, casting her aside as unfit for his bloodline. A shadow without fire, he had called her then, his voice laced with the duty that chained him more surely than any iron. She had felt the bond snap like brittle ice, leaving a scar that burned deeper than any wound. Yet even in rejection, she had seen the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the guilt that now shadowed his every decree. "Do you deny the charges?" the elder pressed, his gaze boring into her like a winter gale. Ilara swallowed, the cold air scraping her throat. "I deny only the fear that blinds you," she said, her voice steady despite the chill that seeped into her soul. "The goddess does not demand blood for loyalty. She asks for sight." A hush fell, broken only by the distant howl of wolves echoing from the mountains beyond the castle walls. Thorn rose then, his movement fluid yet weighted, like a predator rousing from uneasy slumber. The hall seemed to hold its breath as he descended the steps, his boots thudding softly against the stone. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the faint spice of his scent, earth after rain, mingled with the smoke of council fires. His eyes searched hers, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that connection, raw and unspoken. "You speak of the goddess," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear, his breath warm against the frozen air. "But it is the law that binds us. Elara, the pack's survival demands sacrifice." Her pendant warmed against her skin, an inexplicable heat blooming from its core, as if the moon itself stirred in protest. She wanted to rage, to tell him of the dreams that foretold his downfall, of the rival alphas circling like shadows in the frost. But words would only tighten the noose. Instead, she met his gaze with a quiet fire. "Sacrifice without wisdom is madness, my king, and madness will consume us all." He turned away, the mantle swirling like spilled blood, and nodded to the guards. "Take her to the gates. Let the wastes decide her fate." They dragged her through corridors lit by flickering torchlight, the chains clinking like mournful bells. Outside, the storm awaited, a blizzard that whipped snow into blinding veils, the wind howling as if the spirits of the fallen cried out. The gates of the castle groaned open, revealing the endless white expanse of the wastes, jagged peaks shrouded in mist, forests of ice-crusted pines bending under the gale's fury. No one survived long here without the pack's warmth, without the alpha's protection. Elara stumbled into the snow, the cold embracing her like a lover's betrayal. Her thin shift offered no shield against the bite, and already her fingers numbed, the blood from her wrists freezing in dark crystals on the ground. She clutched the pendant, its glow faint but persistent, a solitary star in the gathering dark. Behind her, the gates slammed shut with finality, the howls of the court fading into the wind's lament. As she pressed onward, legs sinking into drifts that pulled like greedy hands, doubt clawed at her resolve. Was this the end her visions had hidden? Or was there redemption in the frozen void? The moon, high and merciless, watched from above, its light fracturing on the snow like shattered promises. And in that light, Elara felt a pull, not toward death, but toward something unspoken, a thread of fate weaving through the storm. The wind howled like a chorus of forsaken souls, tearing at Elara's shift until it hung in ragged tatters against her skin, the fabric stiffening with frost. Each step into the white wastes was a battle against the snow's unyielding grasp, drifts rising to her knees, then her thighs, as if the earth itself conspired to swallow her whole. The pendant at her throat pulsed with a warmth that defied the chill, its crescent rune glowing faintly through the thin veil of ice that crusted her chest. It was her anchor, a whisper from the goddess amid the storm's roar, but even that light flickered now, threatened by the encroaching dark. Hours blurred into an eternity of white agony, her vision narrowing to the endless horizon where peaks clawed at the bruised sky. The moon had dipped low, its silver gaze fractured by swirling flakes, casting the world in shades of ghostlight. Elara's lungs burned with every ragged breath, the metallic taste of blood lingering on her lips from where she had bitten back a cry. Exhaustion clawed at her edges, tempting her to surrender, to let the cold claim her as it had so many before. But the pull persisted, a subtle tug at her core, like an invisible thread drawing her deeper into the wastes, away from the castle's distant silhouette. She crested a ridge of wind-sculpted ice, her bare feet numb and bleeding into the snow, leaving faint crimson trails that the gale erased almost as quickly as they formed. Below lay a frozen ravine, its depths shrouded in shadow, where twisted pines bowed like penitents under the weight of hoarfrost. A low growl echoed from the gloom, Not the wild snarl of a lone wolf, but something deeper, laced with pain. A guttural rumble that vibrated through the air and stirred the fur along her arms, even in her human form. Elara froze, heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. Fear coiled in her belly, sharp and instinctive, urging her to flee. But curiosity, that treacherous spark, rooted her in place. The growl came again, closer, accompanied by the crunch of snow under heavy paws. She peered into the ravine, her eyes straining against the dimness. And there, half hidden by a jutting outcrop of rock, a massive shape shifted. A wolf, larger than any she had seen, its fur matted with blood and ice, golden eyes gleaming with feral intensity. It limped, one foreleg held awkwardly, the limb torn and glistening dark in the moonlight. The beast's gaze locked onto hers, and in that instant the world tilted. Recognition flooded her veins like liquid fire, unbidden and undeniable. Thorn, not in his regal armor, but stripped to his primal essence, the Alpha King reduced to this wounded predator. The bond she had thought severed years ago stirred faintly, a ghost of heat amid the cold, pulling at her with the inexorable force of tide and moon. He was in flight, or pursuit, his form radiating the scent of battle, smoke, iron, and the sharp tang of spilled blood. How had he come here, into the wastes that claimed even the strong? He snarled, low and warning, baring fangs that dripped with fresh crimson. Elara's instinct screamed to run, to deny the pull that made her steps falter toward him. This was the king who had cast her out, who had chosen duty over the fragile connection they might have forged. Fear warred with an unwelcome curiosity. Why was he here, vulnerable and alone? Had the court's shadows followed him, or had his own guilt driven him into exile? "Stay back," his voice rumbled through the wolf's throat, shifting mid-growl into human words, though his form remained beastly. He staggered, collapsing against the rock with a pained huff, steam rising from his nostrils into the frigid air. The wound on his leg wept blood that steamed on the snow, staining it a deep, accusing red. Elara's breath caught. She could feel his pain as if it were her own, a phantom ache blooming in her chest. She should leave him. Let the wastes judge him as they had judged her. But the pendant warmed again, insistent, its rune pulsing like a heartbeat. Against her will, she descended the ridge, sliding on the ice-slick slope, her hands scraping raw against frozen stone. Up close, his form was a study in ruin. Fur clumped with gore, ribs visible beneath the taut hide, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and something deeper, guilt etched into the lines of his muzzle like ancient scars. "What folly brings you here, my king?" she whispered, her voice barely cutting through the wind. She knelt at a cautious distance, the snow soaking through her shift, numbing her knees. Fear twisted in her gut. He could end her in an instant, snap the fragile thread of her life with one swipe. Yet curiosity burned brighter. What enemy had marked him so? The rival alphas from the border wars, perhaps, or the traitors within his own court. Thorn's eyes narrowed, the golden depths flickering with denial. "This is no place for you, Elara. The wastes devour the weak." His words were a growl, laced with the alpha's command, but undercut by a tremor of vulnerability. He shifted then, bones cracking and reforming in a haze of mist and moonlight, until he knelt before her as man once more, naked save for the blood-streaked mantle that had somehow survived the change, draped loosely over his shoulders. Scars crisscrossed his chest, old and new, the latest a gash across his thigh that mirrored the wolf's wound. The connection ignited fully now, instinctive and raw, a spark that leaped between them like fire to tinder. She felt his essence brush hers, storm and earth, duty and despair, stirring memories of the mating rites, the rejection that had left her hollow. But she denied it, shoving the warmth away, rationalizing it as mere survival's trick. And yet here we are, both cast out, she said, her tone edged with bitterness. Did your throne grow too heavy, or did the goddess finally demand your reckoning? He winced, not from the wound, but her words, his hand pressing against the snow as if to ground himself. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken questions, the wind carrying the distant weave of pursuing wolves, his enemies, no doubt, drawn by the scent of royal blood. Fear sharpened her senses, the metallic reek of his injury, the heat radiating from his skin despite the cold. The way his gaze lingered on her pendant as if it held answers he dared not seek. I did not come for you, he murmured, voice rough as gravel under boot. But his eyes betrayed him, tracing the curve of her face, the frost-kissed strands of her hair. Curiosity mirrored in his stare. What Omega survived the wastes, bearing the mark of the old temples? The bond tugged again, denied by both, born of this shared peril rather than desire. Ilara rose unsteadily, the pull urging her closer even as fear bid her retreat. The moon watched from above, its light gilding the blood on the snow, turning it to rubies in the frost. In that moment, amid the howl of the wind and the echo of howls drawing near, she wondered if redemption lay in turning away, or in facing the storm together. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm's fury redoubled, as if the moon itself conspired to bind them, whipping snow into a blinding curtain that swallowed the world beyond the ravine's jagged embrace. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the distant howls that grew nearer, a pack's relentless chorus slicing through the gale. Thorn's blood scented the air, thick and coppery, drawing them like moths to flame. His enemies, shadows from the court's treacherous underbelly, alphas who smelled weakness in their king's flight. She glanced at him, his form slumped against the ice-sheathed rock, the mantle pooling around him like a wound unstaunched. His thigh gash wept steadily, staining the snow in dark blooms that the wind scattered like accusations. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice a threadbare whisper against the roar. Fear coiled tighter in her chest, not just for herself, for him, this broken sovereign who had once held her fate in his indifferent grasp. The pendant at her throat thrummed, its warmth spreading through her veins like liquid starlight, urging her forward despite the instinct to flee. She extended a hand, trembling, the raw scrapes on her palms stinging from the descent. "If they find you like this, it'll be your blood on the snow, not just mine." Thorn's storm-gray eyes lifted to hers, shadowed by pain and the weight of unspoken burdens. He pushed himself up with a grimace, muscles rippling under scarred skin, the shift from wolf to man leaving him raw, exposed. "You owe me nothing, Ilara. Go, before they claim us both." His words carried the Alpha's command, laced with gravel and regret, but his gaze lingered, tracing the frost-laced curve of her shoulder, the defiant spark in her eyes. The bond flickered between them, unbidden, a heat that pierced the cold like embers in ash. He denied it as she did, rationalizing the pull as the waste's cruel illusion, born of shared desperation rather than destiny. But the howls crested the ridge above, sharp and triumphant, paws crunching ice in a rhythm that echoed war drums. 3 shadows emerged from the blizzard, rival betas from the border packs, their fur bristling, eyes glowing amber in the moon's fractured light. They were mercenaries of betrayal, lured by whispers of Thorn's vulnerability, their leader a hulking figure with a notched ear and fangs bared in a snarl that promised no mercy. "The king bleeds," the leader growled, voice booming over the wind. "The throne will drink deeper tonight." Ilara's breath hitched, terror flooding her like ice water. She backed toward Thorn, her bare feet sinking into the drift, the cold gnawing at her resolve. Instinct surged. Protect, even as fear screamed to run. She snatched a jagged shard of ice from the ground, its edge sharp enough to draw her own blood, a crimson bead welling on her palm. The pendant pulsed hotter, sinking with her heartbeat, as if the goddess whispered through its runes, "Stand, child of shadows." Thorn rose unsteadily, snatching his mantle to bind the wound, but the betas lunged, a blur of fangs and fury. The first slammed into him, claws raking his shoulder, drawing fresh blood that sprayed hot against the snow. He roared, countering with a swipe that sent the attacker sprawling, but pain buckled his stance, the gash in his thigh reopening in a rush of warmth. Elara moved without thought, hurling the ice shard at the second beta's flank. It struck true, embedding deep, eliciting a yelp that twisted into rage. The beast whirled on her, jaws snapping inches from her throat, its hot breath reeking of carrion and ambition. She dodged, heart slamming, the world narrowing to the glint of teeth and the burn in her lungs. Thorn's shout cut through, "Elara!" As he tackled the leader, their bodies crashing into the ravine wall in a tangle of fur and flesh. Blood slicked the stone, thorns and the betas mingling in a visceral red that steamed in the frost. Empathy bloomed unbidden in her chest, a sharp ache mirroring his struggle, the bond weaving tighter despite their denials. She wasn't fighting for a king. She was shielding the man beneath the crown, the one whose guilt she glimpsed in every strained breath. The third beta circled her, low and predatory, but the pendant's heat surged, flooding her with clarity, a vision flashing. The moon's light bending, shadows yielding. She grabbed a fallen branch, its bark rough under numb fingers, and swung with desperate force. It connected with the beast's muzzle, cracking bone, sending it reeling into the snow. Gasps tore from her throat, the effort leaving her swaying, but Thorn finished the leader with a brutal twist, neck snapping like dry twigs under boot. He turned to her then, bloodied and heaving, as the remaining betas fled into the storm, their howls fading into whimpers. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths and the wind's mournful sigh. Thorn limped toward her, eyes wide with something akin to awe, the alpha's pride fracturing under the weight of her aid. "You fought for me." His voice was raw, hand reaching out, hovering near her arm without touching, as if afraid the contact would shatter the fragile truce. Elara met his gaze, the bond humming now, no longer denied but acknowledged in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. Empathy softened the edges of her fear, turning curiosity into a tentative bridge. "We protect our own in the wastes," she murmured, though the words tasted like truth beyond survival. The pendant cooled against her skin, its glow dimming as the moon climbed higher, gilding the bloodied snow in silver. They had a common enemy now, the court's shadows, the betrayals that hunted them both. And in that shared peril, the first threads of a deeper tie began to form. Deeper into the ravine they pressed, seeking shelter where the pines huddled like ancient guardians. A cave yawned in the cliff face, its mouth veiled by icicles that dripped like frozen tears. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten winters. Thorn gathered what dry wood he could, his movements labored, igniting a small fire with flint from his mantle's hidden pouch. Flames leaped to life, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls like spirits in communion. The warmth was a balm, thawing the ice in Elara's bones, but it couldn't touch the chill of what lay between them. She sat across the fire, knees drawn to her chest, watching him bind his wounds with strips torn from the mantle. The fabric, once regal crimson, now ragged and stained, spoke of his fall, the king reduced to scavenger in his own realm. Guilt shadowed his features, etched deeper than the scars, and she felt it echo in her own heart. The rejection that had hollowed her, now mirrored in his exile. "Why did they come for you?" she asked softly, the fire's crackle underscoring the intimacy of the question. Thorn's hands stilled, eyes reflecting the flame's gold. The court fractures, Ilara. Traitors whisper of my weakness, of the wars I wage without end. I rejected you to preserve the line, but now the goddess mocks my choices. His voice cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the Alpha's facade, stirring the bond into something warmer, more insistent. She resisted still, rationalizing the pull as the fire's illusion, yet empathy drew her closer, the shared silence weaving trust from the threads of their pain. Outside, the storm raged on, a barrier against the world, but within, the cave became refuge, a fragile sanctuary where fear yielded to the quiet strength of alliance. The moon filtered through cracks in the ice, bathing them in ethereal light, and for the first time, Ilara wondered if the wastes held not death, but the forge of something unbreakable. The fire's glow painted the cave walls in hues of amber and shadow, a fragile ward against the storm's unyielding assault outside. Ilara huddled closer to the flames, the heat seeping into her frost-bitten skin like a hesitant lover's touch, thawing the numbness that had settled in her limbs. The air within the cavern carried the earthy tang of wet stone and smoldering pine, undercut by the sharp metallic bite of Thorn's drying blood. Her pendant rested heavy against her chest, its crescent rune now a subtle ember, pulsing in rhythm with the distant thunder of wind howling through the ravine's throat. She watched him across the fire, his broad frame silhouetted against the ice-veiled entrance, as he methodically cleaned the gash on his thigh with a strip of cloth dipped in melted snow. Each movement was deliberate, restrained, but she saw the tremor in his hands, the Alpha's unyielding strength fraying at the edges. Thorn's eyes, storm-gray and shadowed, flicked to hers more than once, lingering on the pendant that caught the firelight like a captured star. The bond between them hummed low in her chest, no longer a denied whisper, but a steady current, weaving through the silence like roots seeking soil. She resisted naming it, rationalizing the warmth as the cave's illusion, born of survival's raw necessity. Yet empathy stirred unbidden, a quiet ache mirroring his exhaustion, the weight of his crown now a phantom chain dragging at his soul. He had been her rejecter, the king who had severed their potential with a decree as cold as the wastes. But here, stripped of throne and title, he was merely a man marked by guilt, his melancholy etched in the furrow of his brow and the way his gaze drifted to the flames, as if seeking answers in their dance. "Why do you stare at it?" she asked finally, her voice soft as falling snow, breaking the hush. Her fingers brushed the pendant instinctively, its surface smooth and warm beneath the calluses of her exile. It had been her constant since the court's verdict, a relic from her mother's line, whispers of the old ways when omegas were pathfinders, seers of threads unseen. But to her, it had always been mere comfort, a talisman against the visions that plagued her dreams, fractured moons, rivers of blood carving through snow, and a king kneeling in supplication to a shadowed fate. Thorn's hand paused, the cloth dripping crimson-tinged water onto the stone floor. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the firelight carving hollows beneath his cheekbones. "That mark. It's from the lunar temples, isn't it? The rune of the Pathfinder." His tone was measured, laced with a reverence that bordered on awe, but undercut by the melancholy that clung to him like mist. "I thought them legends, omegas who could trace the goddess's will through the veils of night, but you, surviving the wastes, fighting at my side. It's no coincidence." Ilara's breath caught, the pendant flaring hot against her skin as if awakened by his words. She wanted to dismiss it, to cling to the rational shell she had built against the court's cruelty. "Legends for the desperate," she murmured, but doubt crept in, cold as the wind seeping through the cave's cracks. The bond tugged sharper now, drawing his essence into her, earth and storm, duty and despair, stirring memories of her visions, fragments she had buried deep. Rejection had taught her to silence them, to fear the madness they implied. Yet here, in this refuge forged from blood and blizzard, they resurfaced, insistent as the moon's pull. Outside, the storm's howl deepened into a mournful wail, huevos echoing from the peaks like the cries of ancestral wolves. Thorn shifted, wincing as he bound the wound tighter, his scars, a lattice of old battles and fresh betrayals, gleaming in the fire's glow. "The court hunts us both now," he said, voice rough with the gravel of unspoken regrets. "The traitors in my hall, they sense the fractures. My wars have bled the pack dry, Elara. I rejected you to forge alliances through bloodlines untainted by doubt, but it was fear of my own weakness." His admission hung in the air, heavy as the smoke curling upward, vulnerability cracking the Alpha's facade. Guilt shadowed his eyes, a chasm she recognized, for it mirrored her own. The shame of survival, the loss of what might have been. The pendant burned then, a sudden blaze that stole her breath, flooding her veins with liquid moonlight. Vision crashed over her like a wave. Not dream, but revelation, vivid and visceral. She saw the castle's great hall under a blood moon, elders and warriors turning on Thorn, blades drawn in a tide of crimson. Shadows coalesced into a rival Alpha, his form hulking and crowned with iron thorns, whispering promises of power to the fractured court. But woven through the chaos was a thread of silver light emanating from her, from the pendant, guiding Thorn's hand to mercy, to a choice that would shatter the old ways and birth alliance from ruin. The goddess's voice echoed in her mind, soft as snowfall. The pathfinder mends what the king breaks. Blood calls to blood, but light redeems the storm. Elara gasped, collapsing forward, hands clutching the stone as the cave spun. The fire leaped higher, flames twisting into lunar shapes, casting the walls in ethereal silver. Thorn was at her side in an instant, his arms steadying her, the contact igniting the bond into full blaze, a connection no longer resisted but embraced in the flood of truth. His touch was fire and anchor, his scent enveloping her like earth after thaw. "Elara," he breathed, voice laced with urgency and wonder, his fingers brushing the pendant, which now glowed openly, runes etching luminous paths across her skin. "What did you see?" She lifted her gaze to his, tears freezing on her lashes, the weight of destiny settling like fresh snow. "The trial, your trial. They will condemn you as they did me, but the moon interrupts, not with eclipse, but with revelation. I am the key, Thorn, the pathfinder, my visions. They show the way to redemption, not through war, but through choice. Forgive the traitors, unite the packs under compassion, or the blood will drown us all." The words spilled from her, raw and unfiltered, the Dhamma culto manifesting in waves of clarity that pierced the cave's gloom. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The Omega's hidden strength laid bare before the king, who had once deemed her shadow. Thorn's face paled, recognition dawning like dawn over the wastes, guilt transforming into fierce resolve. He saw it now. Her as the fulcrum of his fate, the one whose light could heal the wounds he carried, the pack's fractures born of his unyielding duty. The bond sealed in that moment, not as reward, but as proof, a redemptive thread binding their brokenness. Yet doubt lingered in his eyes, the ethical precipice looming. To heed her vision meant forsaking the throne's iron laws, choosing mercy over power, love over isolation. "If this is true," he whispered, hand cupping her cheek, thumb tracing the path of a frozen tear, "then the goddess has woven us for ruin or rebirth. But can I? Can we bear the cost?" The fire crackled, embers rising like prayers to the moon, filtering through the ice, and Elara felt the spiritual weight settle, the dilemma of destiny versus the freedom of the heart. Outside, the huevos grew distant, as if the winds themselves pondered the revelation, the blood on the snow a testament to paths yet chosen. In his touch, she sensed the Renascimento stirring, but the trial awaited, a moral forge that would test if redemption could crown the fallen. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The dawn broke like a reluctant confession, its pale light filtering through the cave's icy veil, turning the lingering embers to ash-gray ghosts. Alara stirred from a fitful sleep. The pendant's glow faded, but its warmth a persistent echo against her skin, like the memory of Thorn's touch. The bond thrummed between them now, a living vein of silver threading her heart to his, no longer resisted but tested in the quiet hours before the world intruded. She watched him across the dying fire, his form still and watchful, the mantle drawn tight around wounds that would scar anew. Guilt shadowed his features, even in repose, the Alpha's melancholy a cloak heavier than any fur. Her revelation had cracked him open, exposing the ethical chasm he had long navigated alone, the throne's demands versus the goddess's whisper of mercy. The storm had ebbed, leaving the ravine cloaked in a hush broken only by the drip of melting ice and the distant weavos of wolves reclaiming the peaks. Thorn rose as she did, his movements fluid despite the pain, gathering the remnants of their refuge, charred branches, bloodied cloth, into a makeshift pack. "We can't hide forever," he said, voice low and resolute, eyes meeting hers with a depth that stirred the bond's heat. "The court summons its judgments. If your vision holds, we face them now, before the traitors weave their web tighter." Alara nodded, the weight of her gift settling like fresh snow on her shoulders. The Pathfinder's sight had always been a burden, visions flickering at the edges of sleep, but now it burned clear, demanding action. Freedom tempted her, the waste's vast anonymity where rejection could fade into wind. But the bond pulled her toward him, toward the pack's fractured heart. Love, she realized, was no gentle bloom. It was the forge of choice, demanding she confront the past that had scarred them both. She slipped the pendant beneath her shift, its rune a hidden compass, and followed him into the whitening world. They traversed the wastes under a sky bruised with clouds, the snow crunching beneath their boots like brittle bones. Thorn led, his limp masked by determination, but Alara sensed his turmoil through the bond, a storm of duty clashing with the vulnerability she had glimpsed in the cave. The air carried the scent of pine and approaching rain, mingled with the faint, acrid trace of smoke from distant hearths. As the castle's spires pierced the horizon, jagged against the mountains, her visions sharpened. Flashes of the great hall, elders' faces twisted in betrayal, a rival Alpha's shadow looming like thunder. The gates loomed, unguarded but ominous, their iron wolves frozen in eternal howl. Thorn pushed them open with a groan of rusted hinges, the sound echoing like a death knell. Inside, the corridors wound cold and empty, torches unlit, the air thick with the musk of fear and conspiracy. Whispers slithered from the shadows, servants' eyes wide, retreating like mist. The bond surged with Thorn's resolve, his hand brushing hers in silent alliance, a touch that grounded her against the rising dread. The great hall unfolded before them, transformed from her trial's icy judgment into a cauldron of tension. The assembly had gathered, not in orderly semicircle, but in chaotic clusters, warriors gripping spears, elders murmuring over parchments, and at the throne's base, the traitor revealed, Lord Garrick, once Thorn's closest beta, his notched ear a banner of border skirmishes, now turned inward. Beside him stood the rival Alpha, Draven, a hulking figure from the Iron Fang pack, his armor thorned with blackened spikes, eyes burning amber with ambition. The air reeked of blood and betrayal, the metallic tang sharpened by the unburned braziers, as if the hall itself held its breath. Thorn stepped forward, Alara at his side, the pendant flaring hot against her chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd, howls of shock and fury blending into a feral chorus. "The king returns. From death's embrace? Garrick sneered, his voice a venomous drawl, circling like a predator scenting weakness. And with the exile, the goddess mocks us with this farce. Draven laughed, a rumble like grinding stone, his gaze raking over Alara with dismissive hunger. The Omega whispers treason still. We've convened without you, Thorn. Your wars have starved the packs. My alliance offers strength, blood for blood, pack for pack. Yield the throne or watch it burn. The hall erupted, warriors shifting loyalties in murmurs, elders invoking ancient laws. Thorn's face hardened, guilt flashing in his eyes as the weight of his past crashed down, the endless conflicts he had waged, the sacrifices demanded, including her rejection to preserve a purity now proven hollow. Alara felt it all through the bond, his despair, the ethical precipice yawning wide. Forgiveness or war? The pack's survival hung on his choice, but her vision screamed the cost. Rivers of blood if pride prevailed, unity if mercy crowned the fallen. She stepped into the fray, voice cutting through the din like moonlight on steel. The goddess interrupts not with blade, but with sight. The pendant blazed, runes illuminating her skin in ethereal silver, drawing every eye. Gasps turned to awe as her gift manifested, projecting the vision into the air like mist-woven tapestry. The blood moon rising, Draven's forces clashing in crimson snow, Garrick's blade at Thorn's throat. But then, the silver thread, her light guiding hands to clasp rather than strike. Packs uniting under a banner of compassion, the wastes blooming with fragile peace. The hall fell silent, the weight of revelation pressing like winter's hand. Draven snarled, lunging forward, but Thorn intercepted, not with fury, but a steady grip on the rival's arm. Enough blood, Thorn said, voice breaking with the raw edge of redemption. Garrick, your whispers stem from my failures, I see that now. Draven, your strength is welcome, but not through conquest. Join us, or face the wastes alone. Alara's heart pounded, the moral choice searing her soul. Love bound her to this moment, demanding she choose Thorn's path over her freedom, forgiveness over the war that would free her from the pack's chains. Garrick hesitated, eyes flickering with doubt, while Draven's snarl faltered, the vision's truth piercing his ambition. The moon, visible through the high arches, cast its gaze upon them, silver light pooling on the flagstones like spilled mercy. Yet as Thorn turned to her, eyes pleading for affirmation, the dilemma deepened. Could she forgive the rejection that had birthed her exile? Embrace a destiny that chained her to his side? The bond urged yes, but freedom whispered of paths untaken, the spiritual forge testing if love could transcend the scars. Outside, Weavos rose in uncertain harmony, the pack teetering on the edge of war or rebirth. And Alara wondered if the moon's interruption would save them, or demand a sacrifice greater than death. The moon's silver gaze pierced the great hall's arched vaults, spilling fractured light across the flagstones like veins of molten mercy, illuminating the frozen tableau of confrontation. Alara stood at the heart of it, the pendant blazing against her chest, its runes a constellation of fate etched in luminous fire that cast ethereal shadows on the assembled faces. Warriors frozen mid-gesture, elders with eyes wide in dawning reverence, traitors caught in the web of their own ambition. The air thrummed with the scent of smoldering braziers and the faint lingering copper of old blood, now overlaid by the crisp bite of mountain wind seeping through the cracks, carrying distant weavos that swelled like a chorus of undecided spirits. Her heart hammered, a wild rhythm echoing the bond that pulsed between her and Thorn, no longer a tentative thread, but a roaring river demanding she surrender to its current. Thorn's hand remained firm on Draven's arm, his storm-gray eyes locked on the rival Alpha's amber glare, the weight of his choice carving deeper lines into his face. Guilt had hollowed him, years of iron decrees and bloodied borders etching scars that mirrored her own. the rejection that had exiled her soul long before her body. He had rationalized their separation as duty's blade, severing the bond to preserve the pack's unyielding strength, but now, in the revelation's stark light, it crumbled like frost under dawn. "Mercy is not weakness," he declared, his voice a low thunder rolling through the hush, resonant with the melancholy of a king who had lost too much to pride. "It is the forge of true power. Garrick, your betrayals were born of my blindness. I see the fractures I wrought. Join me in mending them, or walk the wastes as I nearly did." Garrick's notched ear twitched, his snarl faltering as the vision's silver tapestry lingered in the air, dissolving slowly into motes of moonlight that danced like fireflies over the throne. The elder's face twisted, ambition warring with the spiritual pull of the goddess's whisper, the pendant's glow reflecting in his eyes like a judgment he could not deny. Draven wrenched free, his thorned armor scraping stone, but he did not strike. Instead, he paced, the hulking form a shadow puppeted by doubt, the howls outside shifting from discord to a tentative harmony, as if the wolves sensed the tide turning. Elara felt it all through the bond, Thorn's ethical precipice, the chasm between the throne's vengeful laws and the compassionate path her visions illuminated. Power tempted him still, the Alpha's instinct to crush rivals and reclaim dominance with blood, but her light, her gift, held him steady, a cure for the wounds that had festered in silence. She stepped closer, the cold stone biting her bare feet, each movement a deliberate choice against the freedom that whispered in her veins. Rejection had been her teacher, forging her into this pathfinder, but forgiveness demanded more, a sacrifice of the solitude she had clung to like a shield. The bond urged union, not as reward, but as proof, the love that would redeem them both through shared rebirth. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with the warmth of his scarred palm, the contact igniting a visceral heat that chased the hall's chill from her bones. "The moon interrupted for us," she murmured, voice soft, yet carrying like wind through pines, her breath visible in the frosted air. "Not to spare death, but to birth something greater. Choose us. Thorn, choose the pack's heart over its claws." The hall held its breath, the flames in the braziers leaping higher as if fed by her words, casting the assembly in a golden red glow that mingled with the moon's silver, turning the space into a temple of liminal fire. Draven halted, his chest heaving, the rival's ambition cracking under the weight of the vision's truth, rivers of blood yielding to alliances forged in compassion, the wastes blooming with unity rather than graves. "You'd crown mercy over might?" he growled, but his tone lacked venom, edged instead with the curiosity of one glimpsing destiny's weave. Thorn's gaze met Elara's, the melancholy lifting like mist under sun, replaced by a fierce, redemptive light. In that instant, the choice crystallized. No war, no exile renewed, but a union that healed the fractures. He released Draven, turning to the assembly with arms outstretched, the mantle falling open to reveal the lattice of scars, now symbols of survival rather than shame. "The goddess speaks through her," he proclaimed, nodding to Elara, the pendant's light bathing his face in ethereal grace. "No more sacrifices to hollow thrones. Garrick, Draven, stand with us. Let the packs merge not in conquest, but in the light of the Pathfinder. Blood binds us, but mercy makes us whole." A murmur rippled through the crowd, swelling into a unified howl that shook the ice walls, warriors lowering spears, elders nodding in solemn accord. Garrick knelt first, his notched ear bowed, the traitor's fire quenched by the spiritual tide. Draven followed, a grudging rumble in his throat evolving into a resonant affirm, the rival Alpha clasping Thorn's forearm in the ancient rite of alliance. The hall transformed, the air alive with the scent of thawing earth and kindling hope, Weavos rising outside in triumphant waves that echoed the moon's silent approval. Elara's tears fell hot, tracing paths down her cheeks to freeze in delicate crystals, the bond sealing in a rush of warmth that flooded her core. Love accepted, not as escape but as the ultimate proof, redeeming the king's guilt and her exile into shared sovereignty. Yet the Renascimento carried its cost. She sacrificed the wild freedom of the wastes, binding her fate to his, to the pack's mending heart. Thorn drew her close, his embrace a fortress against the world's remnants of storm, his lips brushing her forehead in a vow unspoken. "You healed what I broke," he whispered, voice rough with emotion, the wind outside sighing like a benediction. The moon climbed higher, its light pooling around them like a crown of frost and fire, the pendant cooling to a steady glow, its runes fading into quiet promise. In that union, rejection birthed rebirth, the Omega and the King, shadows woven into light, their love a testament that strength lay not in power's grasp, but in mercy's gentle hold. The wastes beyond whispered of peace, the blood of old wounds washed clean by the goddess's grace, and for the first time, Elara felt the spiritual weight lift, destiny no longer chain, but wing. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.